as we explore why a resilient supply chain is important and the steps you can take to move towards resiliency and grasp control in uncertain and changing times. My name is Niko Kalfigkopoulos. I'm joined by my colleague Paul Holland. We will be hosting our session for the next 40 minutes or so. We will then have a Q&A session, but the floor is open to questions throughout the presentation. So please be sure to share your questions in the chat box of this Bright Talk webinar. Please also note that this session will be recorded and will be available on demand on the ISF Bright Talk channel after the session has ended. Let's begin with the presentation. Excellent. So a quick minute of introductions. Again, welcoming you to this session, navigating uncertainty, enhancing supply chain resilience. Let me flick to the first one. As mentioned, my name is Niko Kalfigkopoulos. I'm a general manager at Fractis, which is an ISF company, and I've been part of the ISF member services team since 2021. In terms of previous experience, I've been a CISO at a large multinational company in the UK. I've also been a director at the PwC's UK cybersecurity division and have advised various kind of national programs for the UK government, which includes the National Smart Metering program, as well as the Central Office of Information for the National Cybersecurity Strategy. I hold an MSc from Information Security from Royal Holloway, and I have certifications more than I can remember for my sins. And thank you very much. And over to you, Paul.
Hi there. So yeah, hi there, Paul Holland. I head up the research team here at the ISF, where we are the ones that create all the reports that are available to our members. So I've been with the ISF now since 2019, and for most of my time I've spent whilst I've been here looking at the ICS Insight series, so looking at operational technology and how to secure that. But as well as that, I've been involved in securing containers, deploying open source software and embedding security into agile development. So a lot of stuff around software development and DevOps, DevSecOps, things like that. And also as co-author of our cloud security report and demystifying zero trust. I come from an InfoSec background prior to the ISF as well, and IT before that. So obviously a very, very technically heavy background, but have moved across into kind of information cybersecurity, looking at the whole thing, people, process and technology. So I'm a full member of CSEC here. I've been a CIS for more than 10 years now. And over the last couple of years as well, I've been supporting the UK government with their Secure by Design work as well. And also, yeah, I've certified on 62443, which is an OT-based regulation, and also 27001 lead auditor. But on to what we're going to be talking about today, which is supply chains. And so ultimately, why is cyber important to supply chains? Let's start with setting the scene to see where we go here with this. So why is it important? So when we've looked at it, looking at our own member base, 66% of our members, when surveyed, had over 1,000 suppliers that they needed to look at. And if you look at that even in more depth, 16% of them had over 20,000 suppliers. You know, so it's a lot of other companies that we need to worry about outside of our own. So what we've looked at is different ways of helping to secure the supply chain. We've created reports and tools as well that help with this, including an assurance framework and a way of continuously assuring that supply chain as well, which we'll cover off some of the elements of those as we go through the presentation. So supply chain risks as well. We did a piece of work with Thought Lab, and looking at the different risks that are there. So why executives feel unprepared for the new world of risk. 39% say they have inadequate budgets to ensure cybersecurity. 46% think that cyber risk initiatives at organisations not kept pace with digital transformation. and greater than 50% of CISOs and CIOs say their organisation's growing use of partners and suppliers expose them to a major cybersecurity risk. So what they're saying is that although there's an awful lot of risks about, most of them are heavily worried about the risks that the suppliers expose them to from a cybersecurity perspective. So let's have a quick history lesson, again, highlighting why it's important to help with cyber and supply chains, and why really we need to look at building resilient supply chains. So I think probably one of the first real supply chain kind of cyber issues that most people will be aware of, most people will have seen, would have been the Target one, which is way back in 2014. Where they had a major breach of customer data which came through their HVAC, so they're basically their air conditioning supplier. I'm pretty sure most people are very aware of the Maersk when they were hit with ransomware, where they had to rebuild everything from scratch, even having to go back to pen and paper. So these things have come through supply chains as well. The Maersk attack came through one of their payment providers, which was a Ukrainian-based one, with the Russians trying to take out the Ukrainian infrastructure. They were just collateral damage. You also look at other aspects around the supply chain. So, SolarWinds is software that many people use. They were hacked, and that meant that lots of their customers were accessed as well. So it's important as well from looking at not just the kind of physical suppliers, but your software suppliers as well. And it's that inadvertent part further down the line. So just a couple of years back, Japan's largest port was taken offline by a cyber attack. Now, although Toyota weren't hit by that, and they managed to completely, nothing happened to their network, they managed to continue manufacturing all their cars. The problem is, because the port was offline, they had nowhere to send them. So they had to stop production because they ran out of space to put all their cars. So understanding your supply chain is really important part of being resilient. When you come to some more slightly recent ones, the NHS lost access to blood supplies because there was a ransomware attack on a third party who were helping to supply blood across the country. And then we did have the CrowdStrike IT outage. So maybe not literally a cyber attack, but it highlights how important supply chains are and your suppliers are to your organization. And obviously there's a lot of stuff in the news at the moment where the retail sector has been hit quite heavily. Well, actually I've seen one this morning where one of the key distributors to the retail sector has also been hit by ransomware. So they're not able to send stuff out. So again, although some of the supermarkets themselves are operating effectively and they haven't been hit, again, there's likely to be some empty shelves in some of those products because one of their distributors has been hit and they can't get stuff out to them. So this is a multifaceted thing we need to worry about and need to look at. So really, for me, one of the key things here about building resilient supply chains is a collaboration effort. We need to think about, as cybersecurity professionals and supply chain experts, about collaborating. Yeah, we need to work with procurement, vendor management, legal, and all these other people to work closely to become effective at what we're trying to achieve with supply chain and supply chain security. So here we see this is kind of our supplier management life cycle, with the 7 steps. And actually what you'll find is there's multiple steps here that need multiple teams as well involved. And that's where the collaboration starts. No one team can do all this on their own. Yeah, so even when you look at the first step, defining requirements, well, actually the business need to help with that because they need to, as in the business stakeholders, because they need to say, what is it I need from the supplier that we're trying to negotiate and we're trying to bring in? Procurement need to get involved because obviously they need to have the specific requirements. And so will legal and finance as well, because they're going to have specific requirements to put in place. But also cybersecurity needs to be involved at this part because we need to set requirements of what's really important to cybersecurity and making sure the suppliers are. So, as we work through the steps, there's obviously multiple places where this happens, but that's just an example of why we need to collaborate, why we need to work together. Yeah, cybersecurity we cannot do alone. So assessing critical suppliers becomes down to kind of a joint decision as well, because there's multiple factors to it. Again, like I said, you need to look at the legal side and the contractual side. Can finance work with them? We need to look at it from a cyber perspective and make sure that they're secure, make sure that they're doing the right things. And actually what you'll land up after looking through all of these and doing like a business impact assessment is looking at how critical some of the different suppliers are. Yeah, and once you kind of put all those together and you get that overall potential business impact, if you want to try and make things a little simpler on yourself, focus on the high ones at least to start with. Yeah, because they're the ones that have got the potential greatest risk to cause problems to your business. Now, whether that's cyber attack, whether it's financial, or whether it's like being able to actually supply you with the services and can grind you to a halt in that way, are the different aspects that you need to look at. But having some kind of way to start your conversation and start the way you assess your suppliers, you need to have something to start with, and the business impact assessment, and therefore looking at just high ones, is a good way to start it. But again, like I said, these decisions cannot be made on their own, because you've got to look at it from a business perspective as well, not just this cyber perspective of our CIA triad. Is what happens if we lose this critical supplier? Yeah, will that have much more of an impact on the business? So if you've got only one major supplier that's distributing out 90% of your product, then you're going to have to worry about them a lot more than you will other areas. So here are some of the additional factors: the industry type. So some industries are more prone to cyber attacks or hacktivism, depending on what they are. Certainly when you look at hacktivism, some of the things like oil companies and things, you just see Just Stop Oil in the UK and across Europe as well, where they're starting to try and want to do things, want to try and make a point. Geographical locations. So obviously we did see with the war in Ukraine that that had an impact on many suppliers. It held up a lot of chip manufacturing, which had a massive impact on IT projects where they couldn't get hold of different IT equipment. The amount of shared information that's out there, yeah, because certain of these kind of hacking groups will go after large tropes of data, and also you've got to look at where the data goes as well. So you'll quite often find that you're sharing information with your suppliers. They'll be sharing that with another supplier further down the line to help them out, and this can keep going on. But like I said, I think one of the really important ones is the criticality to the business, and that's not just from a cyber perspective. That's, can you operate effectively without this supplier? Yeah. So these are just some examples of helping you to work out who your critical suppliers are. Continuous supply chain assurance. So what we're looking at here is, as well as actually just making sure you're looking at your suppliers and working out whether they're doing security in a good way, is actually how do you keep on top of that? Yeah, because this isn't, you can't just do it once and forget it, because things will change. Yeah, things will change in their environment, things will change in the relationship that you have with them, things will change in from a global perspective, geopolitics and things like that, and financial impacts as well. So you have to keep an eye on them on a continual basis as well. So for here, if you look at our continuous supply chain assurance report, there's different methods of continuous monitoring, and from that, once you get into the continuous monitoring, there's that continuous reporting side. And again, it comes back to that supplier management life cycle that we have with that monitor, performance and remediate. It gives you a good idea of what's happening with those suppliers, and whether you need to look at doing something different with them, or whether you need to maybe replace them with a better supplier from a security perspective. They might be effective at their job, but if their systems keep going down because of cyber attacks, they're not much use to you. So by able to keeping an eye on what's going on and monitor for changes, it gives you that opportunity to talk to them, at least in the first place, to try and work out how you can best help them, support them, and continue to work together. So there's various different tools and techniques, and the report looks at a kind of core set of those. And what it does is it gives you, they've all got pros and cons to them. Yeah, so what we've got here is there's 7 different tools and techniques we looked at, but there were 6 different criteria that we rated them against. So how easy it is to look at the regularity of the assessments. Yeah, how often can you do them? how in depth the assessments are therefore are. And on the whole, you can see there's quite a correlation between how often you do them. If you can do them very often, then the depth is quite often quite low. The breadth of applicability. So how kind of useful this is, you know, as a breadth of kind of things that you can look at in those regards. Yeah, how much is it useful to you? Then there's the cost side of it. How easy it is to resource, and then the ability to act. So that's actually when you're checking these things, how effective are they in actually making a difference? So you can weigh all those up. You can use multiple ones, but it's a way of keeping on top of the supply chain and the supply chain risks that you've got. So like we said with that, as well as monitoring it, you need to report on it as well. So you need to look at some kind of key risk indicators, key performance indicators. And there's some recommendations in the report as well on that. But some really key things you need to do is identify who you need to report the information to. Yeah, so who are the actual key stakeholders? So again, this comes back to your kind of collaboration piece again. These are the people you're going to need to work with on a regular basis to actually monitor your supply chain, keep on top of it, and help keep that supply chain resilient. Define your key indicators. So look at it. What is it that's important to the business? What are the factors that you need to monitor and keep an eye on? Where possible, use automation, and dare I say it, maybe some AI tools to help analyze the assessments. You know, if you've got enough data there, then you can do quite a lot with automation. But obviously, the one thing to always be careful with automation is make sure you've thoroughly tested it, and you make sure that you've actually got the right information, that you're confident with the answers that are coming out from the information you put in. Ensure the risk owners have the information they need and when they need it. Yeah, so that's about creating dashboards or creating automated reports, so that that they can get to the information, so they can check it as often as they need. And again, that comes back to kind of working out the best things to do as part of the key indicators. Make sure that you know how often you're reporting them. Yeah, so coming back to some of the different tools, there are some of those that you can do regularly. So that means you might be able to create a dashboard that updates on a daily basis. Where if you're using some of the on-site tests for the continuous assurance, you might only really be able to report on that, say, once a year. So it comes back to that conversation and collaborating together to work out what fits best for your stakeholders, the business, and yourselves. And then act on the results. So this is a really important aspect. I've definitely seen this fifth point not put into action very often. It's one of those that we're very good at creating these KRIs. We're very good at reporting on things, but what quite often gets forgotten is you actually need to do something with the results. If things change, you need to go and find out why. I mean, if they've changed for the better, then that's great. But if things have dropped down and it's not reaching the levels of assurance that you really wanted, then conversations need to be had with the supplier, and you need to work out what's going on. So definitely make sure you act on these results, because if you don't, there's not really a lot of point in doing the rest of it. So just to kind of highlight here, as part of the continuous efforts with supply chains, is our supplier security web app has a nice dashboard where you can highlight things like reminders, so you can see what's coming up, so that can remind you to do another assessment or to chase up a supplier. It will not highlight nice things like you've got some suppliers at risk, or what suppliers are in progress of completing the assessments for you. So what that helps you to do is this is part of the kind of the reporting side of it. Yeah, so you can keep an eye on things, because with, you know, as we highlighted at the beginning, with so many organisations having so many suppliers, this is not an easy thing to keep an eye on. Yeah, so by having these kind of reports and dashboards and reminders and things like that, it gives you much more confidence in what's going on, and it allows you to keep a better eye on it as well. And here you can see, so the original one is the homepage. This is the dashboard area, where you can look at different points here. So you can see, you know, some low assessment scores in there, flagged up as red. And then obviously you can see the status of the supplier as well. So again, it just helps you keep an eye on things and keep on top of what's going on, which is really useful, like I said, when you're trying to understand the risks that your suppliers are posing to your organisation. As I mentioned in my intro, so I've spent quite a lot of time looking at OT and ICS security, and that does bring about some additional challenges from a supplier perspective. And part of that is linked to primarily the manufacturers, because a lot of OT ICS environments have bespoke kit, especially in, say, the manufacturing sector. These things, they're the actual suppliers that you're working with. They're the only ones kind of with detailed access and understanding of the equipment. They're effectively black boxes to most of the organisations that use them. So they're heavily reliant on your suppliers, a lot more than many other suppliers within your organisation if you've just, say, got an IT environment. So supply chains are really essential to OT and ICS. So we looked at the supplier management life cycle for that as well, and kind of added in some of the areas where it's really key that the ICS teams are embedded in this as well as the cybersecurity teams as well. So just looking there, you can see there's some areas where both cybersecurity need to be heavily involved and the ICS teams. But there's other areas where it's just the ICS teams as well, because they're the ones that understand their environment much better. So the thing that we found when looking at the research for this is that actually most supplier management processes focus very heavily on information. And actually within the OT environment, there's not lots of information about, and also they have very different kind of concerns. Yeah, so from an IT perspective, cybersecurity perspective, we look at confidentiality, integrity, availability, because we're looking at data and information. Engineers, so in the OT ICS environment, they look at safety, reliability, and performance, but with a very heavy focus on safety. So when they're looking at defining the requirements, again, this is why you need those ICS teams, those engineers involved, because they need to look at the safety aspects as well. So that kind of through the management life cycle, that's why we need that different understanding. It comes back to collaboration again. This is another team that we need to get involved when we're looking at the specifics for OT. So I think there are some opportunities, where we're talking about resilient supply chains, where we're talking about trying to improve security posture and reducing risk. We can turn some of these challenges into opportunities and looking at reducing where we have single points of failure. So what we don't want is us to be just reliant on one supplier. So things like updates and testing. So when we're talking about kind of digital devices, so either IT or OT, we need to make sure that we can work with the suppliers to make sure that updates are effective and tested before we're looking at implementing them ourselves. And that comes back to some of the things we highlight, or some things I highlighted earlier when I did the brief history of supply chain and cyber. So there are ways of looking at it. So, there should be kind of dev environments where we can test updates and patches and things like that, or digital twin environments, which is probably more OT related than IT, but where you have kind of a duplicate setup where you can test things out. The other option is to actually have additional devices, and in some instances, certainly when you're looking at the OT world, having additional devices can be quite useful, because you can update stuff offline and then just do a quick kind of swap out of the devices, rather than maybe having to wait for a full change window to be able to do it. Secure by design as well, really important to make sure that the suppliers you're working with use secure by design as their kind of background, in whatever it is they're making, whether that's physical hardware, devices, or software. Are they actually thinking about security first? Is security in their design process? So again, that's something you can try and tease out when you're initially starting the conversations with them. Other possibilities are to manage the risk out. If it's not possible to update or replace the equipment quickly, you can manage the risk out by effectively replacing it with newer, more up-to-date, more secure devices as quick as possible. Like I said, you might not be able to do it immediately, so it's something you can do on a phased basis. But you can also look, again, certainly in the OT world, you can sometimes look at newer devices that might be more secure, should be more secure. But actually, what you might find is there's additional benefits to the organisation. Yeah, so they might actually speed up the processes that they're doing, and therefore, it's a benefit to the business to update it and get something that can actually speed up, say, the production line. So there's other ways of not just pushing the cyber angle sometimes to manage the risk out. Where obviously that's not possible, you could look at sometimes updating legacy contracts. So if you've got long-standing relationships with suppliers, you can go back and look at the contracts, try and see if you can update them to include cyber in there, incident management stuff in there as well, and stuff like that. I think also one large one here is enhancing the selection process. Again, back to my collaboration point, I'm going to keep going on about it because I think it's really important, is making sure that you've got the right people involved in the selection process at the right steps. Yeah, different people have different knowledge, different expertise. So you need to bring that all together at the right time and in the right place so that you've got the best kind of selection process that you can get. Yeah, because if you can enhance that selection process to include all the important things, not like I said, cyber is obviously what we're focusing on, but all the other elements as well, then actually you stand a really good chance of getting the best supplier for your organisation in. And even if you can't get them to the level you want because there's a limited pool of suppliers, at least you have fully kind of understood the overarching risks that might be left there. Yeah, so by having all that in your selection process at the beginning will really, really help. So I'm just going to pass over to Niko for the next few slides. So he's just going to talk to you in a bit more detail about the supply management life cycle that we have.
Thank you very much, Paul. And may I remind everyone to feel free to submit any of your questions that you have or comments in the questions button on the top right section of your screen as we continue this presentation. Paul, and thank you for a very interesting presentation so far. We're covering very important aspects and elements of the broader supplier lifecycle management. And Paul also mentioned some of the very useful kind of insights and methodologies that the ISF has developed via the ISF research team, which we kind of quoted and have utilized as part of the work that we produce. One of the things I also wanted to touch on briefly is very much that while these papers and methodologies are, at your fingertips, are at your disposal to review, digest, and kind of take parts into your own processes, it's important to note that the ISF also has been working closely with members, not only in order to produce these papers in the first instance, but also to accelerate and augment capability via the ISF services team. And that's something that we've been doing for a number of years now, particularly in the ISF, in the supply security kind of space. And the reason we've done that is, again, to assist members in accelerating particular activities or augmenting existing teams where there is too much to do and not enough people to do it with. So kind of one of the things that we focus on is to try to help answer some of these important questions that we covered as part of the presentation as well, which is helping members understand where the actual risk lies within their supply chain, helping them understand how the adequate and the correct security requirements can be built into supply contracts, including onboarding, including during contract kind of assessment and evaluation, as well as kind of termination process, as well as assisting members in how to maintain an accurate picture of the risk in the supply chain by actually conducting the assessments themselves. So the steps that you see here as part of the supplier management life cycle from 1 to 7, these are all parts that you may already be involved in. But in any case, the papers that we have published are very, very helpful, and we would strongly suggest that you have a look at them for inspiration and assistance. And also please bear in mind that throughout the supply management life cycle, the services team has been very active in, again, assisting members in defining the requirements from scratch, conducting assessment either as part of a procurement cycle, but also evaluation of RFPs and tenders, as well as kind of during contract assessing the suppliers on your behalf. One thing I'd also like to mention is that this methodology that we've touched upon, and also Paul mentioned in the previous slides, is available via the ISF Assure platform. And a couple of specific references made earlier about the supplier security web app. The interesting point here is that the methodology that you saw in the slide previous to that, all of the steps of that methodology have been kind of reflected in the web app tool. So effectively, as ISF members, you have access and you have the ability to utilize that web tool to kind of accelerate your internal processes, all in a kind of a cloud instance for your organization. So other than the papers and the methodologies themselves, which we would highly recommend that you have a look at, we would also highly recommend that you have a look at the web app and maybe even run a test assessment with a selection of questions that you can kind of customize from the Supply Security web app, all of which connects to the methodologies like the SOGP and everything else. So as a recap to this session, Paul, kind of over to you if you'd like to talk about some of the kind of key points of the presentation and kind of low-hanging fruit, if you will.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, I said I'd keep banging on about collaboration, then it's come up again. You need to make sure that there is collaboration between procurement and security. It's really important. Procurement have likely already got the relationships with legal and finance and people like that as well. But we need to make sure that all of these people are looped in. We need to make sure we're working together. Understanding suppliers' interactions. Again, this is important to understand kind of what they do for your business, and also not just what they do, but how they do it. So are they actually physically connecting into your network? Are they remoting into your network? Are they able to make changes in your network? Are they not connecting to your network at all, but you still need to worry about them because if they have a cyber incident like the Japanese port one, are they going to affect your business? Make sure that to include cybersecurity into contracts. Yeah, so again, a lot of legacy contracts won't have them in, so we need to look at going back and finding a way of kind of getting those contracts updated to make sure that cybersecurity is being considered and is being implemented in your suppliers' organisations. I think this one's really important and something that quite often isn't thought about or is missed. So we need to practice our incident response exercises. Yeah, we need to look at what happens if an incident happens. And as part of that, one of the things you can do is actually test what happens if a supplier goes offline and you can't get access to them and it stops some of the services you're using. Make sure you use that as one of your examples. But even when you're not doing something directly related to a supplier going offline or being hit with ransomware or whatever it might be, actually get your suppliers involved in your cybersecurity exercises, because you need to make sure that your suppliers also know how to react if you have an incident yourself, and that's something that I've rarely seen actually happening. So for making sure that you're really understanding what's going on, you need to know that if I need to get X company in to do something, if we have an incident, you need to make sure that they will actually do it. How are they going to react when you have an incident? Also, try and make sure you've had the discussions around the fact that brain's gone. Around the fact that they're going to react well, and where you kind of are in their list. Yeah, because again, if there's a major incident that's hit across lots of organisations, are you going to be able to get hold of the forensics company that you need to get hold of? So getting some kind of understanding of how important you are to them. Not an easy conversation to have, and probably very difficult to get the answer to. But if you can get some kind of understanding of where you are on their priority list, that can be really helpful as well. And it's also good to onboard some backup suppliers. Yeah, have some contracts in place with people, kind of on a retainer basis, rather than as a full supplier. But if something goes wrong, that at least gives you that ability to kind of fall into supporting and helping them. Yeah, because what you don't want to do is trying to go through the whole onboarding process with a new supplier when you've completely lost your original supplier for whatever reason, because these things aren't quick. Going through an onboarding suppliers doesn't happen the same day. So, if you can go through that pre-work with them, then that makes a lot more sense beforehand. So that's just some kind of highlights, recap some of the stuff we went through. Just quickly, Niko, have you got anything else to add to that for any kind of quick wins that people can go for?
Nothing to add here. I've already seen some interesting questions come from the attendees, so I'd be happy to jump into those if you're okay with that also, Paul.
Yes, no problem. Yep, let's move on to questions.
Excellent. Just to remind everyone that, again, you feel free to submit questions as we discuss if you have anything to add. I'll start with the first question, and then we'll take them as they come along. Where would you start first to establish or improve third-party assurance? Would you start with people, process, or technology?
So I'll kind of not straight away answer the direct question. You need all three to do it effectively. And it's the same with kind of anything we do in cyber. You can't really ignore the people, the process, or the technology in any of these things. So I see them with equal importance, but I think if you want to look at it from where to start first, I'd start with the people, because I've banged on about collaboration the whole way through. So people has got to be the first thing you start with, because you need to talk to the right people, get the right people on board. Then I would move on to process. I think the way the questions worded, I think they're already in the right order. Once you've got the people on board, you can discuss and talk together and get the right processes in place, get the right requirements in place and things like that. And then the technology is what comes in as the last part, because you need somewhere to keep all this information, to log it, to monitor it, for you to be able to do all the things you need to do with your suppliers. So for me, that's the way I'd go about it. But in the grand scheme of things, they all have equal importance, because if one of those three isn't working effectively, the whole thing effectively falls down.
From my side, first of all, I agree with you, Paul. I would definitely put technology last, and they're all equally important, as you pointed out. I would probably pick either people or process, depending on the situation of the organization. Sometimes you don't have the person in post that you need to run it, but you need a process, for example, that has been created or vetted by the organization. So you could start with the process, or you could start with the person if you have found them in charge. But definitely technology comes last once you have the process built and the people to run it, because technology is there to kind of help manage it and accelerate it. So I fully agree with that. Let me go to the next question from an old friend. How do you recommend onboarding backup suppliers without causing ballooning costs? Surely vendors won't want to sit by waiting for a call if they aren't receiving compensation to be on standby. Thank you, Greg, and a very, very interesting point. Can I go first with a view?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, this is a very tricky topic to get right, which for me it goes to, I would only consider backup suppliers for critical business processes or parts of the supply chain. And it doesn't always have to be a standby supplier. Obviously, in kind of disaster recovery or business continuity terms, you can have an off-site, or a cold site, if you will, that's sitting there and costing you money. But then again, you have to rely on, as you said, certain readiness to be on standby. But I've seen organizations often use a backup supplier as their second active, with the ability to ramp things up quickly if needed, which could be an interesting consideration when you have your primary supplier doing a certain part of the business process, and then the secondary does a smaller percentage of it. But part of the selection process of the second backup supplier is that, do you guys have the ability, if I call you within a week's notice or whatever, to ramp up production, coverage, and this doesn't necessarily, it's not a restriction on whether a supplier can produce something for you, but it's also, let's say, if a supplier is a security supplier, which is someone who's running a SIEM SOC or deployment, can they ramp up quickly enough? If your primary supplier, i.e. CrowdStrike, for example, has an issue, how quickly can the second supplier come in? That's just an initial view. But Paul, any thoughts from yourself?
Yes, yeah, I mean, pretty similar on the whole. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, you would at least focus on critical suppliers, or where you've only got the one supplier who does that task. So, you know, I'd kind of focus around those areas.
Thank you very much.
But I think the other element, just, you know, when you're looking at it from a cost perspective as well, it actually comes back to risk-based decisions. Yeah, the same as we make quite often. How risky is it if you don't have a backup supplier onboarded ready? How much difference will it make to the organisation? So I think, like, you know, that still pretty much comes back to which are the critical suppliers. You know, because yeah, if you lose your supplier who supplies your organisation with pens, you can probably last a little bit longer than some of the others. You know, than somebody who's providing a primary service, like, you know, your SaaS service, which is 90% of what your business uses. So, you know, it's that you've got to weigh up the options. Is it cost effective? Certainly in some competitive markets, some people might be happy to be that backup because, you know, they're confident that when it happens that's good for them, you know, because then you might stay with them afterwards. So there are other kind of subtle ways of doing it. But yeah, ultimately it comes down to business decisions on these kind of things. You know, it's got to be cost effective. It's got to be beneficial to the business.
Yes.
You're not going to put yourself out of business by onboarding backup suppliers because it costs too much. It just doesn't make sense.
Just a final thought on this topic, and it's a really interesting question as well, because I don't think we've seen much yet of the whole process of backup suppliers. And the as time kind of passes and the topic of supplier assurance is and becomes more important, I think we'll start seeing more often processes to start thinking about backup suppliers. Because if you think about it, we only have a process. I need a service, go and get a supplier. We don't even think about, you know, do we have a secondary option that we contract in case something falls over? And I think as time passes, I think we'll start seeing that a little bit more often. So I think it'll be part of conversations. I don't think it's happening at the moment, but I think that as the topic gets more traction or more gravity, I think we'll see more of that. On the topic of importance, actually, there's a question that I think actually naturally kind of leans into the conversation so far, which is, do you see third-party risk being in the top 3 of cyber risks for CISOs and boards at this
time? I think it's probably higher up for CISOs than it is boards on the whole. Again, it comes down, depends on the business, partially. Depends on how heavily reliant you are on suppliers.
Yeah.
So I think it's more, boards are probably not quite so focused on third-party risk, I don't feel, because there's bigger things like geopolitics and financial changes, regulatory changes that might well sneak in probably above third-party risk. But they're certainly not going to ignore it. And like I said, some businesses are you know, kind of 90-95% supplier based on what they do. So yes, in those instances, I think they would. I think because of the amount of large cyber attacks that have come via third parties, and there's rumours that some of the recent retail ones were via third parties in the UK. I think it probably is up. It's certainly really up there in CISO's minds of something they have to worry about.
I agree with that, Paul. I would say it's definitely, in my experience, it's definitely in the top 3 for CISOs, as you said. In boards, I don't think so. I don't think that's the case. At best, cyber risk in general may be the board agenda from a top 3 kind of broader risk. But even that, I think, is a bit of a stretch. Definitely, boards are, you know, paying more attention to the broader cyber agenda. But I think we're not there yet. But, you know, as you said, you know, depending on the types of incidents that we see, where there is, you know, massive impact, either at country or global level, like the examples that you've mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we're likely to then see more attention and more focus on this particular topic. But definitely, I don't think yet it's in boards' minds, but yes, for CISOs. Thank you. All right. As we wrap up, I think we have time for one more question. From your experience, do you think organizations are presently doing enough to adequately manage third-party risk?
No. I'll probably better elaborate on that. Largely, no, I don't think so. It's still one of those things that kind of bubbles under from what I've seen in a lot of organisations. Partially because cyber isn't as often as it should be included early on in the supplier management life cycle. Yeah, it's another one of those areas where we get included late on and then the contract's already been signed or they're so far down the route, it's very difficult for us we can get to ask the questions, but we don't get to kind of provide any actual useful input. And that's partly why I keep banging on about the collaboration side. Yeah, we need to be working together so we can get all this effectively sorted. So for me, I don't think we are, and I think we need to do more.
Yeah. I second that. I was just thinking back, and the methodology that we talked about, the supply chain methodology from steps 1 to 7. I don't think I've seen the full kind of framework in operation, properly established with processes and everything else. There are parts of that methodology that I've seen being done, but in its totality, at least my experience, I've not seen it implemented. And also I agree that the majority of organizations are now starting to include supplier risk as part of things that need to be done and reported upwards, which is also key, right? Because as soon as you start reporting to say, we have 1,000 suppliers with maybe 50 critical or whatever that number is, how many of them include security requirements in their contracts? How many of them have we assessed? As soon as that information starts becoming visible and reportable, that's when management starts paying attention. But there's it's a stepped journey to that. I don't necessarily think it's being ignored, but I don't think, again, going back to the question, do we think organizations at organization level, are they doing enough? I think not.
Yeah, very much so.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much for the questions submitted. And that concludes our showcase session for today. If you do have any further questions that we didn't have time to answer, please do get in touch with contact details on the screen or elsewhere. As always, we do look forward to continuing the conversation with our members on ISF Live. And if you're not part of our community yet, be sure to head down to the attachment section to find out more. We'd love for you to leave your feedback and let us know if you enjoyed the session. And also just to mention that we will be back again tomorrow at 11 BST, British Summer Time, for our third showcase session on what the EU Cyber Resilience Act means for your business and how to stay compliant. Thank you very much once again, and we will speak to you soon.
Thank you.